The scent of stale whiskey and gunpowder filled the air as Madeline Turner clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, pushing through the double doors of the Silver Creek Bank on a sweltering July afternoon in 1876. Her heart pounded against her ribcage like a wild Mustang, but she kept her chin high despite the hole in her left boot and the patches on her faded blue dress. She had promised her dying father she would save their ranch, and she intended to keep that promise even if it meant begging for a loan from the most heartless man in Wyoming territory. The bank's polished wooden floors gleamed beneath her dusty boots as she approached the ornate desk where Harold Wilmington, Silver Creek's most prominent banker, sat counting dollar bills with his bejeweled fingers. The portly man's eyes narrowed when he spotted her, his mustache twitching with undisguised contempt. "Miss Turner," he drawled, not bothering to stand. "What brings you to my establishment? Surely not another loan application." Madeline swallowed hard, feeling the eyes of the other bank patrons on her back. "Mr. Wilmington, I've come to discuss—" "There is nothing to discuss," he interrupted, his voice carrying throughout the bank's marble lobby. "Your father borrowed against that worthless plot of land for years. Now he's dead, God rest his soul, and you expect me to throw good money after bad." He laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the high ceiling. "Look at you, girl. Can't even afford proper clothes. What makes you think you could run a ranch?" Heat rose to Madeline's cheeks as whispers rippled through the room. She gripped her father's old ledger tighter, knuckles turning white. "My father's land is fertile, sir. The drought has passed, and I have plans to—" "Plans?" Wilmington laughed louder, standing now to gesture at her worn appearance. "Listen to her, everyone. The pauper has plans." Several men in expensive suits chuckled along with him. "Miss Turner, your kind belongs in the laundry or the saloon, not running businesses. Even if I wanted to help, which I don't, no one would loan money to a woman, especially one as financially deficient as yourself." Madeline fought back tears, refusing to give him the satisfaction. But before she could respond, the bank's doors swung open, and the atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. Ethan Zimmerman filled the doorframe, his tall figure backlit by the afternoon sun. The legendary cowboy's presence commanded attention without effort, from his worn leather boots to his weathered hat. Everything about him spoke of hard-earned respect. A former Texas Ranger turned cattle driver, his reputation for fairness and deadly accuracy with a Colt revolver preceded him wherever he went in the territory. "Afternoon, folks," he said, his deep voice calm as he surveyed the scene before him. His eyes lingered on Madeline's flushed face, then settled on Wilmington's smug expression. The banker's smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Zimmerman, what can I do for you today?" Ethan moved forward, spurs jingling with each deliberate step. He stopped beside Madeline, close enough that she could smell leather and prairie sage on his clothes. "I couldn't help overhearing your financial advice." Wilmington, his tone remained conversational, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Seems to me you're overlooking a sound investment opportunity." "I assure you, I know my business better than some cowhand," the banker replied, though his voice had lost some of its previous confidence. Ethan removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. "Is that right? Because I've ridden past the Turner property. That's prime grazing land with good water access. Any fool can see its potential." He turned to Madeline, his expression softening. "Miss Turner, would you mind if I took a look at those figures you're holding?" Startled, Madeline handed over her father's ledger. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and she felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. Ethan flipped through the pages with practiced ease, nodding occasionally. The room had fallen completely silent, all eyes on the unusual pair, the shabby-dressed ranchwoman and the respected cowboy. "Just as I thought," he finally said, closing the ledger. He turned to face the banker again. "Wilmington, you're making a mistake. The Turner Ranch could be profitable within a year with the right investment." "And what would you know about banking, Zimmerman?" Wilmington scoffed, though his voice had lost its earlier bravado. "I know that before I was driving cattle, I helped my father run one of the most successful ranches in Texas." Ethan's voice remained level, but carried throughout the silent room. "And I know opportunity when I see it." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a bank draft, sliding it across the polished desk. I'll stake my own money on Miss Turner's capabilities. $500 to start, with more to follow if needed. Gasps echoed through the bank as Wilmington stared at the draft, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You're investing in her?" he finally sputtered. "No, sir," Ethan replied, placing his hat back on his head. "I'm partnering with her. Equal shares, if Miss Turner is amenable." He turned to Madeline with questioning eyes. Madeline stood frozen, unable to comprehend the turn of events. This man, this virtual stranger, was offering to save everything she held dear. Pride urged her to refuse, but practicality won out. "I would need to review the terms," she managed, straightening her shoulders. Ethan's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Of course. I wouldn't expect anything less from a businesswoman." Wilmington's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "This is preposterous. She can barely afford the clothes on her back." "And yet," Ethan replied coolly, "she had the courage to come here today, facing your ridicule, to fight for her land. That shows character, Mr. Wilmington. Something you might want to consider investing in yourself." The room remained utterly silent as Ethan offered his arm to Madeline. "Miss Turner, perhaps we could discuss the details over coffee?" Madeline nodded, placing her hand lightly on his forearm. As they walked toward the door, she could feel every eye in the place following them. "Mr. Zimmerman," she whispered once they were outside, "why would you do that for a stranger?" Ethan looked down at her, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "Miss Turner, I've been watching you try to save that ranch single-handedly for months. Anyone with that much determination deserves a chance." He paused, then added more softly, "And please, call me Ethan." "Madeline," she offered in return, the first genuine smile in months finding its way to her lips as they walked down Silver Creek's dusty main street together, neither aware that this moment would forever change both their lives. The town cafe was nearly empty when they entered, most folks still busy with afternoon work. Ethan guided Madeline to a corner table, pulling out her chair with a gentlemanly flourish that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. She sat carefully, acutely aware of her shabby dress and the curious glances from the proprietor, Mrs. Holloway. "2 coffees." "Please, madam," Ethan called, hanging his hat on a nearby hook. In the better light of the cafe, Madeline could study him properly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years in the saddle. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing beneath his collar, and his hands bore the calluses of hard work. "I still don't understand," Madeline said, once Mrs. Holloway had served their coffee and retreated. "There are dozens of investment opportunities in this territory. Why choose my failing ranch?" Ethan considered her over his steaming cup. "It's not failing, it's struggling. There's a difference." He leaned back in his chair. 4 months ago, I was riding through your south pasture with permission from your father," he added quickly. "I saw you mending fence alone in the rain. Must have been working for hours by the look of it. Next day I spotted you helping birth a calf, when most men would have called for assistance." Madeline flushed, remembering that difficult calving. She hadn't realized anyone had witnessed her struggles. "Most people would have sold after your father passed," he continued. "But you stayed, fighting tooth and nail." His eyes, a deep green flecked with amber, held hers steadily. "That kind of determination is rare, Miss Turner." "Madeline," she reminded him, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. "And determination doesn't mean much against empty coffers." "Which is where I come in." Ethan pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. "I've had this drawn up for a week, waiting for the right moment. It's a partnership agreement if you're interested." Madeline took the paper with trembling fingers. "You've been planning this?" He nodded. "I've been looking to put down roots. Driving cattle is a young man's game, and I've saved a considerable sum over the years. Your land has potential good water, fertile soil. With investment in better stock and proper equipment, it could thrive." She studied the document, surprised by the fair terms. Equal partnership, with provisions for buying each other out if necessary. Nothing that suggested he was trying to swindle her. "This seems equitable," she said cautiously. "But why not just buy your own ranch? Surely there are properties available without the complications of a female partner." A smile played at the corners of Ethan's mouth. "Perhaps I prefer complications, Miss Madeline." His expression grew more serious. Truth is, building something from nothing has never appealed to me as much as helping restore something worthy that's fallen on hard times. Mrs. Holloway approached with a plate of biscuits she hadn't ordered. "On the house," the older woman said, with a warm smile for Madeline. "About time someone stood up to that pompous Wilmington." She patted Madeline's shoulder before returning to the kitchen. "See," Ethan said softly, "people respect what you're trying to do. They just haven't had the means to help." Madeline stared at the agreement, her mind racing. Her practical side recognized the opportunity for what it was, perhaps her only chance to save her father's legacy. Yet pride made her hesitate. "I won't be a charity case, Mr. Zimmerman," she said firmly. "If we do this, we're true partners. I won't be beholden to you." "Ethan," he corrected gently, "and I wouldn't want it any other way. You know that land better than anyone. I bring capital and some ranching experience. Together, we might just make something remarkable." Their eyes met over the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a mutual recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. "I'll need a day to think," she finally said. "This decision affects everything." "Of course." He pulled a pencil from his pocket. "I'm staying at the boarding house. Meet me there tomorrow with your answer." Madeline nodded, carefully folding the agreement and tucking it into her pocket. As she stood to leave, Ethan rose as well. "Regardless of your decision," he said quietly, "what Wilmington said was wrong. You're worth 10 of him, threadbare dress or not." The unexpected kindness nearly undid her composure. Madeline managed a nod before hurrying out, the bell above the door jingling as she stepped into the late afternoon sun. Her mind was so preoccupied that she nearly collided with Sheriff Miller on the boardwalk. "Careful there, Miss Turner," the lawman said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. His eyes were kind beneath his graying mustache. "Everything all right? Heard there was quite a scene at the bank earlier." "News travels fast," she murmured. "Small town," he replied with a shrug. "For what it's worth, most folks are pleased someone finally stood up to Wilmington. That Cowboy Zimmerman, is it? He's got a solid reputation." "You know of him?" The sheriff nodded. "Served as a Texas Ranger for years. Man who values justice. Doesn't draw his gun without cause, but when he does," he gave a low whistle. "Let's just say I'm glad he's not on the wrong side of the law." This new information followed Madeline all the way home, where the familiar sight of her struggling ranch awaited. The faded 2-story farmhouse needed paint. The barn roof had a worrisome sag, and the corral fence leaned precariously in several places. Yet it was home, the only one she'd ever known. Inside, she lit a lamp and spread the agreement on the kitchen table, reading every word carefully as night fell over the Wyoming countryside. By the time she finally went to bed, Madeline had made her decision, though sleep eluded her as she contemplated the path ahead and the enigmatic cowboy who had unexpectedly appeared to walk it with her. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through Madeline's window. She dressed carefully in her one good outfit, a navy skirt and white blouse she'd kept for church and special occasions. Her mother's cameo, the only piece of jewelry she owned, adorned her collar. After twisting her chestnut hair into a neat bun, she studied her reflection in the spotted mirror. "You can do this," she told herself firmly. "It's just business." But as she rode her aging mare into town, Madeline knew it was more complicated. Accepting Ethan's proposal meant sharing her father's dream with a stranger, a handsome, intriguing stranger who had defended her honor, but a stranger nonetheless. Silver Creek was already bustling when she arrived. Several townsfolk nodded respectfully as she passed, a marked change from the pitying glances she'd grown accustomed to since her father's death. Word of Ethan's confrontation with Wilmington had clearly spread. The boarding house sat on the quieter end of Main Street, a well-maintained 2-story building with a wide porch. As Madeline approached, her stomach tightened with nerves. Before she could knock, the door opened, revealing Ethan. He wore a clean white shirt with a dark vest, his hair still damp from washing. "Madeline," he said, smiling, "I was hoping you'd come early. Mrs. Peterson has breakfast waiting." "I've already eaten," she lied, not wanting to accept more charity. Her pantry was nearly bare, but pride kept her chin high. Ethan's eyes told her he didn't believe her, but he didn't press the issue. "Then perhaps we could talk in the parlor." He stepped aside. gesturing for her to enter. The boarding house parlor was modestly furnished, but comfortable. A few other guests read newspapers or wrote letters, paying little attention to the new arrivals. Ethan led her to a quiet corner where they could speak privately. "Have you decided?" he asked once they were seated, his expression carefully neutral. Madeline reached into her pocket and produced the agreement, now signed at the bottom. "Yes," she said, placing it between them. "I accept your proposal with one condition." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And that is?" "I want it clear that this is a temporary arrangement, 5 years. If the ranch becomes profitable, I'd like the option to buy out your share." She met his gaze directly. "The Turner Ranch has been in my family for 2 generations. I intend to keep it that way." Instead of offense, Madeline saw respect in Ethan's eyes. "A reasonable request," he said, taking the agreement and adding a clause with steady handwriting. 5 years. If either party wishes to dissolve the partnership thereafter, the other has first right to purchase their share at fair market value. He signed beneath the addition and handed it back to her. "Agreeable?" Madeline read the new terms and nodded, an unexpected wave of emotion making it difficult to speak. This man continued to surprise her with his fairness. "Then we have a deal, partner." Ethan extended his hand across the table. When she placed her palm against his, the contrast was stark, her smaller hand, calloused from ranch work but still feminine, against his larger one, weathered by years on the frontier. His grip was warm and sure, and the handshake lasted a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I'll visit the ranch tomorrow to assess what's needed most urgently," Ethan said as their hands parted. "Today, I need to conclude some business with the cattle broker and secure our funds from the bank." His mouth quirked. "I imagine Wilmington will be thrilled to assist me." Despite her nerves, Madeline found herself smiling. "I almost wish I could witness that exchange." "You could," Ethan suggested. "As partners, you should be present for financial transactions." The thought of facing Wilmington again made her hesitate, but Madeline recognized the importance of establishing herself as an equal in their partnership from the beginning. "You're right," she decided. "When do we go?" Ethan checked his pocket watch. "The bank opens in 20 minutes. Shall we?" As they walked together down Main Street, Madeline was acutely aware of curious glances. Silver Creek had never seen her striding purposefully alongside a man like Ethan Zimmerman, and speculation was undoubtedly running wild. She caught sight of Clara Jenkins and Beatrice Holloway, whispering behind their hands as they passed the general store. "People will talk," she murmured, nodding discreetly toward the gossiping women. "Let them," Ethan replied, unconcerned. "Small towns run on gossip like steam engines run on coal. It'll die down once they find something more interesting." The bank was just opening when they arrived. The young teller's eyes widened at the sight of them entering together, and he nearly tripped in his haste to alert Wilmington of their presence. The banker emerged from his office moments later, his expression souring when he spotted Madeline. "Mr. Zimmerman," he acknowledged stiffly, pointedly ignoring her. "How may I assist you today?" "Mr. Wilmington," Ethan replied pleasantly. "Miss Turner and I would like to open a joint business account. We've formed a partnership to operate the Turner Ranch." Wilmington's face cycled through several emotions: disbelief, irritation, and finally a forced neutrality. "I see. Well, that would require certain formalities, paperwork, verification of funds, all of which we're prepared to complete," Ethan interrupted smoothly. He produced several documents, including their signed agreement and a banker's draft for a sum that made Madeline's breath catch. It was more than she'd imagined, enough to purchase quality breeding stock, repair the essential structures, and still leave operating capital. Wilmington examined the draft with barely concealed envy. "This seems to be in order, though I must question the wisdom of entering such an arrangement with—" His eyes flicked dismissively to Madeline. "Inexperienced management." "Your concerns are noted," Ethan said coolly, "but unnecessary. Miss Turner has been effectively managing that ranch single-handedly for months. With proper resources, her expertise will be invaluable." The unexpected praise warmed Madeline from within. She straightened her shoulders and met Wilmington's gaze directly. "We'll need the account established today, Mr. Wilmington. We have suppliers to pay." The banker's mustache twitched with annoyance, but he gestured toward his office. Very well. This way, please. An hour later, they emerged with their business concluded. The Turner Zimmerman Ranch account was officially established, and Madeline carried a small ledger documenting their initial deposit. That went better than expected, she remarked as they exited the bank. Ethan chuckled. Wilmington may be arrogant, but he's a businessman first. Your money spends as well as anyone else's. He glanced at her. Are you free for lunch? We should discuss our immediate priorities. Madeline hesitated. Being seen sharing another meal with Ethan would certainly fuel town gossip, yet they did have legitimate business to discuss. Perhaps we should return to my ranch instead, she suggested. I could show you around, and we could discuss needs on site. Ethan nodded. Sensible. I'll hire a horse from the livery and meet you there in an hour. I have one more errand to complete. They parted ways, Madeline heading to the general store to purchase badly needed supplies, while Ethan strode toward the cattle broker's office. As she selected flour, coffee, and other necessities, she couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation from other customers. Quite handsome, that Zimmerman fellow. Foolish to partner with a woman. Always thought Madeline Turner had more sense. She kept her expression neutral, though the gossip stung. By the time she'd loaded her purchases onto her mare and headed home, Madeline had steeled herself against the town's speculation. What mattered was saving the ranch, not what people thought of her methods. The ride home gave her time to contemplate the whirlwind changes of the past 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she'd been on the verge of losing everything. Now she had a business partner and financial backing. It seemed almost too fortunate to be true, raising the question that had nagged at her since Ethan's offer. Why was he really doing this? His explanation about admiring her determination seemed genuine, but Madeline had learned the hard way that men's motives were often more complex than they appeared. Her brief engagement 3 years earlier to a silver prospector who'd been more interested in her father's land than in her had taught her caution. Yet something about Ethan felt different. His actions matched his words, and the respect he'd shown her went beyond mere politeness. Still, Madeline resolved to proceed carefully, protecting her heart even as she embraced this unexpected partnership. When she arrived home, she quickly tidied the main house, embarrassed by its shabby condition, yet unwilling to apologize for circumstances beyond her control. She had just finished arranging coffee cups on the kitchen table when hoofbeats announced Ethan's arrival. From the window, she watched him dismount a sleek chestnut gelding, pausing to survey the property with a practiced eye before approaching the house. His assessment continued as she greeted him on the porch, his gaze taking in the sagging steps and weathered siding. "The place has good bones," he commented, following her inside. "Your grandfather built it?" "My father, actually," Madeline replied, pouring coffee into the chipped cups. 23 years ago, when he married my mother. They came from Missouri with little more than dreams and determination. "And now it's yours to preserve," Ethan said, understanding in his voice. He accepted the coffee gratefully. "I'd like to see everything the good and the bad. No sense in pretending problems don't exist if we're to fix them." The next 2 hours were spent walking the property. Madeline showed him the barn with its leaking roof, the corral that needed new posts, the south pasture with its reliable spring, and the small herd of cattle once fine stock, but now diminished to just 20 head after she'd been forced to sell most of the animals to pay debts. Ethan asked questions, made notes, and occasionally crouched to examine soil or test the sturdiness of a fence post. He spoke knowledgeably about cattle breeding, water management, and building repairs, confirming his claimed expertise in ranching. By late afternoon, they had completed the tour and returned to the house, settling at the kitchen table with fresh coffee to discuss their findings. "We have our work cut out for us," Ethan admitted, reviewing his notes, "but nothing that can't be fixed with time and resources." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Your father did well choosing this land. The water rights alone make it valuable." "He always said water was more precious than gold in cattle country," Madeline replied, a pang of grief hitting unexpectedly. "He would have loved discussing ranching with you. He had so few people who understood his passion." Something softened in Ethan's expression. "I wish I could have met him." He hesitated before adding, "My own father taught me everything I know about cattle. Lost him to a heart condition 5 years back." This glimpse of personal history surprised Madeline. I'm sorry, she said sincerely. It's not easy losing a parent. No, Ethan agreed quietly. It changes you. He cleared his throat, returning to business. I think our first priorities should be repairing the barn roof before winter, and acquiring at least 10 quality breeding heifers and a good bull. With proper care, we could double the herd within 2 years. Madeline nodded. The south fence also needs reinforcement before we can use that pasture effectively. Agreed. I can hire some men from town to help with the major repairs. He studied her face. You've been doing everything yourself, haven't you? I had no choice, she said simply. Hired hands require wages I couldn't pay. Well, that changes now. Ethan's tone brooked no argument. You're skilled, Madeline, but no one person can run a ranch this size alone. We'll start with 2 reliable hands and add more as needed. The matter-of-fact way he included her in these decisions, saying we instead of I, reinforced the genuine partnership he seemed to envision. For the first time since her father's death, Madeline felt a flicker of real hope for the future. As twilight approached, Ethan reluctantly prepared to leave. I'll return tomorrow with supplies for the barn repair, he said, standing on the porch. And I've arranged for Jenkins at the Mercantile to extend credit on our account for anything you need in the meantime. Thank you, Madeline said, suddenly awkward as the business discussion concluded, and awareness of their unusual situation returned. A bachelor and an unmarried woman, partners in a remote ranch, it defied convention in ways that would certainly raise eyebrows. Ethan seemed to read her thoughts. People will gossip, he acknowledged. If that concerns you, it doesn't, she interrupted, more firmly than intended. I stopped caring what this town thinks of me months ago, when they left me to struggle alone after my father died. Present company accepted, she added, with a small smile. He studied her face in the fading light. You're remarkable, Madeline Turner, he said softly. Then, with a tip of his hat, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving her staring after him with a strange fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way he'd looked at her in that final moment. True to his word. Ethan returned early the next morning with a wagon loaded with lumber, nails, and roofing materials. He wasn't alone. 2 men accompanied him, introduced as Sam Fletcher and Roy Daniels, experienced ranch hands hired to help with repairs and cattle management. Fletcher worked my father's ranch in Texas for years, Ethan explained as the men began unloading supplies. Daniels comes highly recommended from the Rocking W spread. Both know cattle and construction. Over the next 2 weeks, the ranch transformed at a pace Madeline could scarcely believe. The barn roof was replaced, the corral rebuilt, and critical fence sections repaired. Ethan worked alongside the hired men, his shirt often soaked with sweat as he hammered, sawed, and hauled materials. Madeline threw herself into the work as well, refusing to be sidelined despite Ethan's initial protests about certain tasks being too heavy. After she demonstrated her ability to handle fence posts and roof beams as competently as any of them, he stopped objecting and instead treated her as an equal partner in the labor. Their evenings fell into a comfortable routine. After the day's work, they would sit on the porch, discussing plans and progress while sharing simple meals Madeline prepared. Sometimes they remained there long after eating, talking as stars appeared above the Wyoming plains. During these conversations, Madeline learned more about Ethan's past, his years as a Texas Ranger, pursuing justice across the frontier, his time driving cattle up the Chisholm Trail, and the wanderlust that had kept him moving from territory to territory until something about Silver Creek made him want to stay. In turn, she shared stories of growing up on the ranch, of her mother's death from fever when Madeline was 16, and her father's dogged determination to make the land prosper despite droughts, harsh winters, and market fluctuations. He never gave up, she said one evening, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and purple. Even when the bank started pressing for payments, he kept believing next season would be better. He passed that resilience to you, Ethan observed, his voice warm with admiration. Or stubbornness, Madeline replied with a self-deprecating smile. A useful quality in ranching. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her profile in the fading light. Without it, most would quit at the first drought or blizzard. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Fletcher, who'd ridden to town for supplies. The ranch hand dismounted, looking troubled as he approached the porch. "Everything all right, Sam?" Ethan asked, straightening. "Mostly, boss." Fletcher removed his hat, fidgeting with the brim. "Got the supplies, but there's talk in town I thought you should know about." Madeline tensed, guessing what was coming. "About us, I presume." Fletcher nodded uncomfortably. "Some unpleasant speculation, Miss Turner. Banker Wilmington seems to be encouraging it, suggesting improper arrangements between you two." Ethan's expression darkened. "Wilmington needs to mind his own affairs." "It's not just him," Fletcher continued reluctantly. "Mrs. Hargrove at the boarding house asked if you'd be returning, said it wasn't proper for you to be staying out here without marriage," Madeline finished flatly. "How predictable." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "Thank you for telling us, Mr. Fletcher. I'll prepare supper while you and Mr. Zimmerman discuss tomorrow's work." She retreated inside, anger and embarrassment warring within her. The town's reaction was exactly what she'd expected, yet it stung nonetheless. More troubling was the potential damage to the ranch's reputation and business prospects if such gossip persisted. Later, after Fletcher and Daniels had retired to the bunkhouse, Ethan found her washing dishes with unnecessary vigor. "Madeline," he said gently, "we need to discuss this." "There's nothing to discuss," she replied, not looking up. "Small-minded gossip is hardly unexpected." "Perhaps not, but it could affect the ranch's standing suppliers, cattle buyers, banking relationships. Our personal discomfort aside, we need to consider the business implications." His practical approach helped calm her emotions. Madeline dried her hands on her apron and turned to face him. "What do you suggest? I won't sell my share and step aside, if that's what you're thinking." "That never crossed my mind," Ethan assured her, looking genuinely surprised by the suggestion. "This is your home, your legacy. I was thinking we might consider a more conventional partnership." Madeline stared at him, uncertain of his meaning until comprehension dawned. "Marriage?" she asked incredulously. "You can't be serious." "It would solve certain practical problems," he said, his tone deliberately casual, though she noticed his hands weren't entirely steady. "Many successful ranches are run by married couples. It would silence the gossip, solidify our business relationship, and be a complete sham," she interrupted, heart pounding inexplicably. "Marriage should be based on more than convenience, Mr. Zimmerman." "Ethan," he corrected automatically, "and many marriages begin as practical arrangements that develop into something more substantial over time." He paused, studying her face. "Unless the idea of being married to me is completely repugnant?" The question caught her off guard. The truth was, despite her protests, Madeline had found herself increasingly drawn to Ethan over the past weeks. His integrity, work ethic, and the gentle consideration he showed her were qualities she deeply respected. And she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when he sometimes looked at her a moment too long across the dinner table. "It's not that," she admitted softly, "but I won't marry for convenience or gossip or business. I watched my parents' love for each other. They had something real. I always hoped." Understanding filled Ethan's eyes. "You deserve that," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have suggested otherwise." He moved toward the door, then hesitated. "For what it's worth, Madeline, a marriage between us wouldn't be entirely about convenience, at least not for me." Before she could process this surprising confession, he was gone, leaving her staring at the closed door with 1,000 unspoken words on her lips. Sleep eluded Madeline that night. She tossed restlessly, replaying Ethan's words and the look in his eyes when he'd made that final admission. Was he developing feelings for her, or merely trying to make his practical proposal more palatable? And what of her own emotions? In just 3 weeks, Ethan Zimmerman had transformed from stranger to business partner to something more complex. She admired him, certainly, trusted him, despite her initial reservations. And when he stood close, explaining cattle bloodlines or demonstrating how to repair a hinge, her awareness of him was far from strictly professional. But marriage, the idea seemed simultaneously absurd and strangely appealing. Morning brought no clarity, only the necessity of facing Ethan over breakfast. When she entered the kitchen, however, she found only Fletcher drinking coffee. Mr. Zimmerman rode into town at first light. Miss Turner, the ranch hand informed her, Said he had business to attend to and would return by noon. Madeline felt both relief and disappointment at the reprieve. She busied herself with chores, supervising Daniels as he repaired irrigation channels, while Fletcher worked on the chicken coop. By mid-morning, the distinctive sound of approaching horses drew her attention to the road. To her surprise, it wasn't just Ethan returning, but Sheriff Miller as well, both men looking grim as they dismounted in the yard. "Miss Turner," the sheriff greeted, removing his hat. "Might we speak inside?" Alarmed, Madeline led them into the kitchen. "Has something happened?" Ethan and the sheriff exchanged glances before Miller spoke. "I'm afraid there's been some trouble, madam. Mr. Zimmerman came to my office this morning with concerns about Harold Wilmington's activities at the bank." "What sort of activities?" Madeline asked, puzzled. "The illegal sort," Ethan replied flatly. "I've suspected for weeks that something wasn't right with his accounting. When I made inquiries in Denver about his reputation, several financial irregularities were mentioned." Sheriff Miller nodded. "Based on Mr. Zimmerman's information, I examined the bank's public records this morning. There's evidence suggesting Wilmington has been manipulating loan terms and possibly embezzling funds." Madeline sank into a chair, stunned. "Are you saying he's been stealing?" "And worse," Ethan said, his expression hard. "The paperwork on your father's loans shows irregularities. Interest rates changed between agreements. Payment records altered. Sheriff Miller believes Wilmington deliberately pushed your father into default." "But why?" Madeline whispered, though a sickening suspicion was already forming. "Land speculation," Miller confirmed. "Wilmington has been quietly acquiring foreclosed properties throughout the county, then selling them to Eastern investors at substantial profit. Your ranch, with its water rights, would be particularly valuable." Rage and grief washed over Madeline in equal measure. Her father had died believing he'd failed as a rancher and provider, when in truth he'd been systematically victimized by a corrupt banker. "Can you prove this?" she asked, hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. "We have enough evidence to arrest him," Miller said. "The territorial judge arrives next week for circuit court. Wilmington will face trial then." "I want to see him," Madeline declared, standing abruptly. "I want to look him in the eye when he's arrested." Ethan moved to her side. "Are you certain? It won't be pleasant?" "My father died thinking he was a failure because of that man's greed," she replied, voice shaking with controlled fury. "Yes, I'm certain." An hour later, Madeline stood beside Ethan and Sheriff Miller in the bank's marble lobby, watching as Wilmington was confronted with evidence of his crimes. The banker's face progressed from indignant denial to panicked bargaining as Miller methodically presented document after document, showing altered figures and misappropriated funds. "This is absurd," Wilmington blustered, sweat beading on his forehead. "A misunderstanding, clearly. I'm a respected businessman." "You're a thief," Madeline stated coldly, stepping forward. "You stole from my father, from everyone in this town who trusted you." Wilmington's eyes narrowed when he spotted her. "Miss Turner, I should have known you'd be involved in this farce. Found yourself a protector in Zimmerman, did you? How convenient." Before anyone could react, Madeline slapped him hard across the face, the crack of it echoing in the suddenly silent bank. "My father worked himself to death, trying to meet your fraudulent demands," she said, voice low and dangerous. "He deserved better. This town deserved better." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, handcuffs ready. "Harold Wilmington, I'm arresting you on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and financial malfeasance. You have the right to," with surprising speed for his bulk. Wilmington shoved past the sheriff and lunged toward the rear door. Ethan moved instantaneously, tackling the banker before he'd taken 3 steps. They crashed into a desk, sending papers flying as Wilmington struggled futilely against Ethan's stronger grip. "It's over, Wilmington," Ethan said firmly, hauling him to his feet and holding him while Miller applied the handcuffs. "Face it with whatever dignity you have left." As the sheriff led Wilmington away, customers and bank employees watched in shock, whispers already spreading like wildfire. Madeline stood trembling, the adrenaline of confrontation leaving her lightheaded, until Ethan's steady hand on her elbow guided her to a chair. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, crouching beside her. She nodded, though tears threatened. "I keep thinking of my father, how he blamed himself. How he apologized to me on his deathbed for leaving me with debts. Her voice broke. Without hesitation, Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her as the tears finally came. She cried for her father, for the months of struggle and fear, for the relief of finally understanding why everything had gone so wrong. When the tears subsided, Madeline became acutely aware of Ethan's embrace, strong and comforting, his hand making gentle circles on her back. More surprising was how right it felt to be held by him, as though she'd found a sanctuary she hadn't known she was seeking. She pulled back slightly, embarrassed by her breakdown, yet reluctant to leave the circle of his arms. "I'm sorry. I don't usually—" "Never apologize for feeling deeply, Madeline," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your father would be proud of your strength today." Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier falling, a truth acknowledged. When Ethan helped her to her feet, his touch lingered, and the look they exchanged held none of the awkwardness of the previous night's conversation. As they walked out of the bank together, Madeline sensed they had crossed an invisible threshold. What lay ahead was unclear, but for the first time, she allowed herself to consider possibilities beyond mere survival, possibilities that increasingly included the man beside her. News of Wilmington's arrest spread through Silver Creek like a prairie fire. By evening, the whole town was buzzing with speculation and revelations as other victims of the banker's schemes came forward. The saloon was packed with people discussing the scandal, and even the church social planned for the weekend had been hastily repurposed into a community meeting about the bank's future. For Madeline and Ethan, the aftermath brought unexpected developments. The territorial bank examiner, summoned from Cheyenne to investigate Wilmington's accounts, discovered that the Turner Ranch's mortgage had been improperly managed. With adjusted interest rates and proper credit for payments that had been lost under Wilmington's administration, the outstanding debt was significantly reduced. "It won't erase everything," Ethan explained as they reviewed the examiner's findings at the kitchen table 3 days after the arrest. "But it means our financial position is stronger than we thought. We can accelerate some of our improvement plans." Madeline studied the figures, still adjusting to the shift from desperate survival to cautious optimism. "The new breeding stock you ordered could arrive sooner then? Next week, if the rail shipment is on schedule?" Ethan hesitated, then added, "There's something else we should discuss." The seriousness in his tone made Madeline look up sharply. "What is it?" With Wilmington's arrest and the revelations about his business practices, public perception has shifted. Several people have approached me in town, expressing support for our partnership. Mrs. Holloway even scolded Mrs. Hargrove for her earlier gossip. "That's unexpected," Madeline said cautiously, uncertain where he was heading with this information. Ethan met her eyes directly. "What I'm saying is that the pressure to conform to conventional arrangements has eased. If you were concerned about town gossip influencing our business decisions, that concern seems less relevant now." Understanding dawned. "You mean regarding your marriage proposal?" "It wasn't a proper proposal," Ethan corrected quickly. "More a practical suggestion that I now realize was poorly timed and inadequately expressed." He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "What I'm trying to say, Madeline, is that you're free to consider our partnership purely in business terms, without social pressure." Madeline absorbed his words, noting what remained unspoken. "And if I were to consider it in other terms?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Ethan's expression softened, vulnerability replacing his usual confidence. "Then I would tell you that my feelings have evolved beyond business since the day I saw you stand up to Wilmington in the bank," he said quietly. "That I admire your courage, your intelligence, and your dedication to this land. That when I wake each morning, my first thought is of seeing you at breakfast." He paused as if gathering courage, then continued more softly. "But I would also tell you that I respect your wishes above all else. If friendship and business partnership are all you want from me, I will honor that completely." Madeline's heart thundered in her chest. For months she'd focused solely on survival, pushing aside any thought of personal happiness as an unaffordable luxury. Now, faced with Ethan's honest declaration, she found herself at a crossroads she hadn't expected to reach. "I need time," she said finally. "Not because I don't feel something for you, but because everything has changed so quickly. 3 weeks ago, I was facing foreclosure alone. Now we're partners. Wilmington is in jail, and you're—" She gestured helplessly. "You're saying things I never expected to hear again after David left." Ethan's brow furrowed. David? Madeline hadn't intended to mention her former fiancé, but perhaps Ethan deserved to know why she hesitated. David Mercer. We were engaged 3 years ago. He was a silver prospector who seemed to love me until a better opportunity arose in Colorado. He left a note explaining he couldn't be tied down to a struggling ranch and a rancher's daughter. Understanding and indignation flashed across Ethan's face. Then he was a fool who didn't deserve you. Perhaps, she acknowledged with a sad smile. But it taught me caution about men's intentions, especially regarding this land. Ethan nodded slowly. A reasonable lesson. Then let me be clear about my intentions, Madeline. I value this ranch for its potential, yes, but I value your determination, your intelligence, your heart far more. If you decided tomorrow to sell this land and move to San Francisco, I would be disappointed to lose the ranch, but devastated to lose you. The raw honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. Madeline found herself believing him, despite her hard-earned skepticism. Yet still she hesitated, unwilling to rush into a decision that would alter the course of her life. "Give me until the cattle arrive," she said finally. "1 week to sort through my thoughts. Can you wait that long for an answer?" Relief and hope brightened Ethan's features. "I would wait much longer for you, Madeline Turner," he said simply. The next week passed in a blur of activity as they continued ranch improvements while preparing for the arrival of the new cattle. Ethan respected Madeline's request for time, maintaining a friendly but careful distance in their interactions. The breathing space allowed Madeline to observe him more objectively, how he treated the ranch hands with respect but clear authority, how he took time to explain his decisions rather than simply giving orders, how his eyes still followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. Most telling was an encounter 4 days after their conversation, when Madeline overheard Ethan speaking with Roy Daniels about future plans for the ranch. "Miss Turner has final say on any changes to the north pasture," Ethan was saying as she approached the corral. "Her father developed that irrigation system, and she knows it better than anyone." "Unusual, taking direction from a woman," Daniels remarked, not unkindly. "Miss Turner isn't usual," Ethan replied. "She's exceptional. This is her family's legacy, and I'm privileged to help her preserve it, not the other way around." The simple sincerity in his voice, spoken when he had no idea she was listening, affected Madeline more deeply than any formal declaration might have. On the 7th day, the cattle arrived 10 pregnant heifers and a magnificent Hereford bull that Ethan had purchased from a renowned breeder in Colorado. As they watched the animals being unloaded from the railway cars in Silver Creek, Madeline felt a surge of hope for the ranch's future. "They're beautiful," she said, admiring the healthy, well-bred stock that would form the foundation of their improved herd. "They are," Ethan agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found him watching her instead of the cattle. "Madeline?" She knew what he was asking without words. The week she'd requested had passed, and a decision was due. Before she could respond, however, they were interrupted by a commotion near the stockyard entrance. A group of men had gathered, voices raised in anger. At their center stood Harold Wilmington's son, Theodore, a dissipated young man known for gambling and troublemaking. "That's ranch-killing Zimmerman," Theodore slurred, clearly drunk despite the early hour. "Ruined my father with his lies." Ethan sighed. "Stay here," he told Madeline. "This won't take long." He approached Theodore calmly. "Go home, Wilmington. You're drunk." "Don't tell me what to do," Theodore snarled. "My father's rotting in jail because of you and that Turner woman." He spat on the ground. "Everyone knows she's just your—" Whatever vulgar accusation he intended was cut short as Ethan moved with startling speed, gripping Theodore's shirt collar and backing him against the stockyard fence. "Choose your next words very carefully," Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Miss Turner is a lady deserving your respect, regardless of your grievances with me." Theodore struggled briefly, then went still as he registered something in Ethan's expression. "Fine," he muttered. "Just let me go." Ethan released him, stepping back warily. For a moment, it seemed the confrontation had ended. Then Theodore's hand darted to his waistband, pulling a small Derringer pistol. Several people shouted warnings as the gun came up. but Madeline was already moving. Without conscious thought, she threw herself forward, crashing into Ethan just as the pistol discharged. They tumbled to the ground together as Sheriff Miller and several bystanders tackled Theodore. "Madeline!" Ethan's voice sounded distant through the ringing in her ears. "Are you hurt?" "My God, there's blood." She blinked, realizing they were on the dusty ground, Ethan cradling her upper body while frantically checking for injuries. A sharp pain in her left arm registered belatedly. I think the bullet grazed me," she managed, looking down at her torn sleeve where blood was slowly spreading. Ethan's face had gone pale beneath his tan. "We need the doctor," he said, voice tight with controlled panic. "Someone get Dr. Warren." The next hours passed in a haze for Madeline. Dr. Warren confirmed the bullet had indeed only grazed her arm, leaving a painful but relatively minor wound that required cleaning and bandaging. Throughout the treatment, Ethan remained by her side, his expression oscillating between concern and barely suppressed fury at Theodore Wilmington. By evening, she was resting in her bedroom at the ranch, propped against pillows while Ethan hovered anxiously in the doorway. "The doctor said you should sleep," he reminded her, clearly struggling with the desire to stay close and the propriety of leaving her to rest. "I will," she assured him. "But first, I believe we have unfinished business." Ethan hesitated, then entered the room, taking the chair beside her bed. "That can wait until you're recovered. Today was traumatic." "Nearly getting shot does clarify one's thinking," Madeline replied with surprising calm. "When I saw Theodore pull that gun, my only thought was protecting you. Not the ranch, not our business, just you." Ethan's breath caught audibly. "Madeline, I've spent a week watching you, Ethan, listening when you didn't know I was there, thinking about what I truly want." She reached for his hand with her uninjured arm. "I was afraid of making another mistake, of trusting the wrong man again. But you've proven yourself in ways David never did, not just with words, but with actions." Hope dawned in Ethan's eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying yes," Madeline said simply. "Yes to partnership in every sense. Yes to building something together that's more than just a successful ranch. Yes to loving you, which I realize I've been doing for longer than I was ready to admit." For a moment, Ethan seemed frozen, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. "I love you, Madeline Turner," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I think I have since the moment you refused to be cowed by Wilmington in that bank. You're the bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever known." "Brave enough to marry a former Texas Ranger with a habit of antagonizing corrupt bankers?" she asked, a smile lighting her face despite the pain in her arm. "Is that a proper proposal this time?" Ethan asked, eyes crinkling at the corners. "It is," Madeline confirmed. "Though I'm doing it all wrong, aren't I? You should be the one asking, while I pretend to consider it demurely." Ethan laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. "When have you ever done anything demurely?" He sobered, taking both her hands in his. "Madeline Turner, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not for convenience or business or to silence gossip, but because I love you and want to build a life with you on this land that means so much to you." Tears pricked at Madeline's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "with all my heart, yes." Later, Madeline would remember that evening as the true beginning of their shared life, not the partnership agreement, not the confrontation with Wilmington, but this quiet moment when pretense fell away and they acknowledged what had been growing between them from the start. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, once Madeline's arm had healed and the most pressing ranch improvements were completed. They married in Silver Creek's small church, with the entire town in attendance. The same community that had once whispered about them now celebrated their union, especially after Theodore Wilmington's trial had revealed the full extent of his father's corruption and the many families affected by it. Sheriff Miller gave the bride away, Fletcher served as best man, and Mrs. Holloway organized a reception that became the social event of the season. Even the territorial governor, passing through on official business, stopped to congratulate the couple whose partnership had exposed corruption and brought a measure of justice to Silver Creek. As they exchanged vows, Ethan and Madeline stood as equals partners in business and in life, each valuing the other's strengths and supporting the other's dreams. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Madeline with a tenderness that belied the strength in his weather-roughened hands, and the congregation erupted in cheers. The Turner-Zimmerman ranch flourished in the years that followed. The quality breeding program Ethan established and the land management techniques Madeline refined together created one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. They built a new wing onto the house, repaired all the outbuildings, and hired a proper staff to manage the expanding enterprise. 2 years after their wedding, they welcomed twins, a boy and a girl, who inherited their mother's determination and their father's sense of justice. Madeline continued to manage the ranch books and make key decisions even while raising children, breaking convention in ways that gradually became accepted as neighboring ranches noted their success. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ethan presented Madeline with a surprise: the deed to the ranch, amended to remove any mention of their partnership agreement and instead listing the property simply as the Turner Ranch, preserving her family name and legacy for future generations. "But we're partners," she protested, confused by the gesture. "It should carry both our names." Ethan shook his head, pulling her close. "The name honors your father and what you fought to save. Our children will know the story, how their mother stood against corruption and refused to surrender her birthright, how she built something lasting from near ruin." "With your help," Madeline reminded him, resting her head against his shoulder as they watched the sunset from the same porch where they'd spent so many evenings planning and dreaming. "I couldn't have done it alone." "You might have," Ethan mused, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You're stubborn enough, but I'm grateful every day that you didn't have to, and that you let me stand beside you." Madeline smiled, thinking of that day in the bank 5 years earlier when a proud, threadbare woman and an honorable cowboy had faced down a bully together. How far they had come since that moment when the room fell silent and their journey began. A journey neither could have imagined would lead to such profound happiness. "The best partnerships," she said softly, "are the ones you don't see coming." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, hands intertwined, watching stars appear over the ranch they had saved and transformed, together a legacy of love as enduring as the Wyoming plains stretching before them.